Good afternoon and welcome to today's post-cabinet press conference. I'm joined this afternoon by the Minister of Finance and the Attorney General, who both have some short announcements, and then we'll take your questions. Over to you, Mr. Minister of Finance.
Right. Thank you, Minister of Public Administration. Two things I'd like to talk about. I was just in Washington heading a delegation comprised of senior officials from the Ministry of Finance and also the Central Bank, holding bilateral meetings with the World Bank and the IMF with respect to technical assistance in particular. And we have made arrangements for experts, primarily from the World Bank, but also from the IMF, to give us advice on a number of pressing matters. First one would be an appropriate oil and gas fiscal regime in the current environment of low oil prices and declining production in our oil and gas fields. And that team is already here. In fact, they returned with me from Washington on the flight on Tuesday, and they're already meeting with officials in the Ministry of Finance. And they have wide experience on an appropriate fiscal regime, because one of the things we need to do at this time with low oil prices is to model a fiscal regime that would achieve two objectives, which are quite often contradictory. And one is to maximize revenue for the government and also to provide sufficient incentives to oil companies to expand their exploration, their drilling, and their production of oil and gas. We are also getting assistance with the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. You'll remember the government spoke about disaggregating the fund into a heritage fund and a stabilization fund. I was very fortunate to meet the original team who assisted the government way back in 2006 with respect to the formation of that fund, which led to the legislation that is now the Heritage and Stabilization Fund Act of 2007. And that same team is returning to assist us after having looked at the performance of the fund from 2007 to now, and being the persons who gave the original advice. I think they're very well placed to help us going forward to see how we could maximize returns from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund and also come up with appropriate rules for drawdowns from the fund. I've also received an offer of assistance, which I accepted, for the World Bank to send a team of experts to review public expenditure in all key areas of government activity, our spending in areas such as education, national security, and so on, just to give us an update as to where we are in terms of how we spend money, how the government spends money, to review it to see if we're getting value for money and so on. And we're also getting assistance on an appropriate foreign exchange policy and a number of other fiscal and monetary matters. And therefore, I found that this trip on this occasion was very, very useful, very productive for Trinidad and Tobago. And if all of the arrangements that we are putting in place work well, it will certainly assist this country going forward in this period of uncertain revenues. Secondly, and I'll give a much more detailed update in due course, maybe to the Parliament or in another forum, on exactly what was discussed. But it's all in the interest of Trinidad and Tobago. And secondly, since the announcement on the 8th of April with respect to increased taxation on what we have deemed to be luxury cars, that is cars with engine sizes exceeding 1,999 cc's, I received a number of inquiries from new car dealers, from used car dealers, foreign used car dealers, individuals affected by the change in policy and the change in taxation, as to whether we would entertain moratorium or a transition period, and yes, we are going to do that. In fact, there's a debate in the House of Representatives on Monday because these new taxes, the increase in customs duty and motor vehicle tax, have to be debated and passed by the House of Representatives. An order was made on April 8th. It became effective immediately, but the law requires that these matters be brought to the Parliament, both houses, within 21 days and approved by both houses of Parliament. So I have a tight parliamentary schedule, which we will complete next week. We'll be going to the House on Monday with these changes in customs duty and motor vehicle tax, and to the Senate on Thursday to meet the deadline of April the 29th, which is when the matters must both be passed by the Parliament. I'm still deliberating. A decision will be made by Monday when I pilot the debate on these two matters in the House of Representatives on exactly how we'll approach this. But what we'll be looking at is two issues. One, whether vehicles are in transit from another country, having been ordered before the changes took into effect. And secondly, vehicles that are here in Trinidad and Tobago but have not been cleared from the customs bond, because people were hopeful that there would be a decision of this nature. So a decision is going to be made. I will work out an appropriate period that would assist the majority of people who are affected. And on Monday, I will indicate the time period up to which people will be allowed to register their vehicles at the old rates, and after which the new rates would kick in, because the Minister of Finance has the power to waive taxes of this nature. It requires a cabinet decision, and the cabinet will make its final decision on this next week. But people are going to get relief. People who are found themselves stuck by this sudden announcement. Thank you.
AG, thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Permit me to update the nation through you on a few matters wearing the hat of Attorney General and also the hat as Chairman of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. I'm pleased to report that I attended over the last few days in the United States meetings of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force Steering Group Committee, which I chair. And at that committee, the continued harmonization of efforts of the 27 member states which comprise CFATF was tabled into, in particular, the work that is being conducted in anti-money laundering and also in counter-terrorist financing. There was a very pointed and engaging continuation of the work of the Steering Group Committee of CFATF. At that conference, I was also able to inform of Trinidad and Tobago's continued commitment and provision of significant resources, both in terms of human capacity and financial commitment, to the CFATF enterprise. It is, in fact, the position that Trinidad and Tobago is currently providing manpower resources in relation to the work of the CFATF, and also physically providing resource allocation through joint enterprise of whatever services are required. This dovetails very importantly with Trinidad and Tobago's own efforts driven in two ministries in particular. As one, the Minister of National Security is the prime contact for the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. Two, the Ministry of the Attorney General, or Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs is in fact the driving factor behind the current chairmanship of CFATF. There is, of course, the invaluable work of the Ministry of Finance insofar as it is involved in its capacity of direct relationship with the FIU and also with the central bank and other supervisory agencies. Right now, the position in Trinidad and Tobago is significantly benefited by the approach that is being taken in the ministry which I head, that is the Office of the Attorney General, Ministry of Legal Affairs. I'm pleased to say that we have established an anti-terrorism desk and specifically are driving the effectual application of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago in anti-terrorism, and also effectively putting into place the anti-money laundering provisions so that one is not only technically compliant in having laws to deal with these issues, but that one is seen to enable the laws through the correct approaches. That is by way of supplementation and enabling of the various investigative and prosecutorial agencies, including the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, which has, of course, the Financial Investigation Bureau, including the work that is done as the prime motivator in having designations of terrorists effected, and also in managing the issue of reported and reputed foreign terrorist fighters who are returning to the jurisdiction. The ministry of which I head, Office of the Attorney General, has established a very special arm in the ministry, which is not only taking the applications to the courts of Trinidad and Tobago, but which will also have operationalization of new laws, which by now you would have noticed on our legislative agenda, which was published on last Friday in the Parliament. So it's just a matter of reporting to you that the efforts against terrorism, that the efforts against money laundering are being supported, certainly in very sincere way through the Office of the Attorney General, Ministry of Legal Affairs, Ministry of National Security, and Ministry of Finance, and that we certainly do intend to bring real results, not only by way of technical compliance with new laws which will come about, but also by way of effective implementation of the existing laws of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
Thank you, AG, and now we make ourselves available for your questions.
Good afternoon, Joel Brown from TV6 News. A question to the Attorney General. Could you just give us a little more details about this anti-terrorism desk? Would it be comprised of law enforcement officers, or is it a civilian-based unit of attorneys? What is it exactly?
The anti-terrorism desk had its first product demonstrated in November of 2015, when you would have seen us designate Kareem Ibrahim under the provisions of Section 22B of the anti-terrorism legislation. The last government had sat on that matter for several years and had simply not effected the designation or the pursuit of property behind that. That was the first product brought about. The desk is comprised of a specialist officer, legal officer, in the Ministry of the Attorney General, also supplemented by other legal officers under direct supervision, and then works in conjunction with the investigative and prosecutorial arms in the police, has coordinations with Special Branch, with Interpol, and importantly, with the collation and management of information which has to go to the court under process of the DPP's advice. So if one is to achieve a designation under the anti-terrorism law, or to treat with someone who is deemed to be or argued to be in breach of anti-terrorism positions, you have to go to the court. That designation in court must be treated with in terms of a certain standard of evidence which must be produced. The court then has to deliberate upon it, and then designations happen that way. It really requires a coordination of a number of efforts in various agencies, but it is important that someone drives that process to make sure that each silo is speaking to each other and that the designations happen as the law contemplates they ought to happen.
There are members of the Muslim community who are expressing concern that this issue of red flagging and national returning from the Middle East and so on is painting a broad brush on the entire Islamic faith in Trinidad and Tobago. How is the government treating with that concern?
The issue of red flagging is an international phenomenon. I am Faris al-Rawi. I have an Iraqi name. I have roots in the Middle East as well. I am certainly very well familiar with the issue of red flagging. Just having a name that comes from the Middle East and having family that live in the Middle East causes you to be the subject of secondary inquiries in foreign jurisdictions. It's something which is a normal process, is what I'm saying. The international agencies are in a direct, coordinated effort to manage the issue of cross-border travel, particularly by land and non-air entry. That is where you go through a normal flight routine into areas which can be associated with current terrorist activities. And that international effort has resulted in red flagging, as a result of which people have been asked to undergo certain disclosures. There may be investigations gone afoot. What is required in Trinidad and Tobago, and which is actually in place, is that all persons who are red flagged internationally and also by our special branch are the subject of appropriate investigation and surveillance. Because one must move from anecdotal information into evidence, because it is only evidence which stands up in a court of law and in respect of which the laws can be applied.
What about the specific concern expressed by those in the Muslim community that they feel, or some of them feel, the entire Muslim community is being targeted in some way due to this issue of concern about terrorism? As many of them say the majority of them are not involved in any of that kind of thing, but they feel targeted.
I can only say that one obviously must accept the risks of going to war-torn countries or countries which have associations with known terrorist entities, and to be subjected to that fact. There is, importantly to be balanced in our laws, a non-discriminatory approach, so that we act only upon evidence and not upon anecdotal information. This story is something which it transcends the Muslim community. There are many foreigners from the Middle East. There are many Christian Arabs as well, or persons who go to the Middle East who are Christians as well. So it's a much broader issue than just Muslims. I, of course, understand, coming from the very background that I have myself, the concerns that one may have. But this is very much an international obligation which we are obliged to carry out by virtue of supporting UN Resolution 1278 against terrorism. It is something which must be managed as well under the anti-terrorism laws of Trinidad and Tobago, and certainly it is something which the Ministry of National Security and other agencies must keep under active supervision to ensure that due process is fair and that information is managed appropriately.
Attorney General, I ask your forgiveness if I didn't read the details of what the government said when it declared taking action against the estate of Ibrahim. And I'm asking the question primarily because I'm preparing to do an interview on a radio program on Sunday with one of his daughters, because I'm told that he went to his grave refusing to accept culpability and to accept guilt as he was charged. Is the government of Trinidad and Tobago has been satisfied that he did qualify as a terrorist?
It is far from the government's position to do anything other than enable the laws. Let me put this into context. The United States of America sentenced Mr. Ibrahim to a term of imprisonment after due process in the United States on anti-terrorism charges. He was convicted and he was serving a sentence. Having been designated that way, our laws prescribe under Section 22B of the anti-terrorism legislation that persons designated locally or internationally in another jurisdiction are open to designation. The Office of the Attorney General, under my supervision, made an application to the court so that the court could decide whether the conditions were satisfied. Madam Justice Nadia Kangaloo, presiding over this matter, ordered the designation under Section 22B. So the government has no role other than to put into effect the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. It makes no difference. What my view is, my obligation as the Attorney General is to take information, pass it through due process to the courts of Trinidad and Tobago in accordance with procedure, and have a judicial officer decide that position. So it really doesn't matter what my own personal views are. I'm obliged as the constitutional holder to apply the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, and I can't leave it to languish as has happened previously.
So this is a case in which the government didn't have an option?
The government always has an option, but in Trinidad and Tobago, we have been appointed to apply the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. That's one of the observations in our country as to why we have been viewed by CFATF, the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, as not being effective in the application of our laws. It is said, it has been observed, in terms of national risk assessment by the World Bank procedures, in terms of CFATF, which has put us into enhanced follow-up after the fourth round mutual evaluation of Trinidad and Tobago, that we have laws, but we're not applying them. And Trinidad and Tobago wants to know that its government is applying the laws of this country and that due process is afforded to everyone so that each person can have his or her say in the appropriate forum.
Minister Imbert, we were recently downgraded by Moody's. I wanted to find out if during your trip to Washington, if that you had any discussions on this issue, if you have any comment on it right now, and is it going to affect the cost of borrowing on the international market?
The information came to us while we were in Washington that Moody's had made a decision to downgrade our credit rating to a lower level in the investment grade, Baa3. It will affect the cost of borrowing. I'm told it will increase the cost of borrowing by approximately 50 basis points, which is 0.5%. And when I read the press release, because we were sent a copy, the primary driver of the downgrade, and it appears that when Moody's had put Trinidad and Tobago on a review for a possible downgrade, the conditions were already there, so that when Moody's came to Trinidad and Tobago in March, my impression is that they were simply seeking to confirm their original view, and that is because the price of oil has been so low for so long, and there's so much uncertainty as to whether it will recover, for how long, what price it will go to, and that the prevailing view is very pessimistic in terms of the outlook for oil. Moody's was of the view that our revenues would go down, obviously, and that this would affect the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. They also made the point which had been made before by them in their previous review in 2013, I believe, that we still have serious problems with the Central Statistical Office. And even though the new government has made a decision to create a statistical institute, that will take some time. So that at the present time, the structural problems that existed in the CSO in September 2015 are more or less still there because of the radical transformation that is required to data gathering, particularly economic statistics. So Moody's made the point that because of the dysfunctionality of the Central Statistical Office, that also created uncertainty going forward. And they also made a final point that the state of the bureaucracy in Trinidad and Tobago, by which I mean the public service, was such that it would take some time to make the necessary institutional change that is required to diversify the economy. So that while I found the statements to be harsh, as a Trinidadian, I didn't feel good about it, when you take a step back and look at it objectively, it is a fact that oil prices have been very low for a long time, and the outlook for oil prices is not good. That is a fact. And it is a fact that the CSO is not providing the kind of quality data that we require. And it is a fact that the bureaucracy is such in Trinidad and Tobago that it will take some time to transform the economy. So on the face of it, I concluded it was fair comment, so that the new government now, we have to accelerate our program to get that statistical institute up and running and provide the kind of credible, independent, reliable economic data that everybody requires, not just the rating agencies, but the government as well, and the population, and interest groups in the society. And also look at the agencies and ministries that will drive the transformation effort, which would be primarily the Ministry of Trade and Industry and other ministries, and give those agencies the support that they require. The Exim Bank would be involved as well. Give them the support they require to accelerate the diversification process. So that's where, having looked dispassionately at what Moody said, we now have to go forward and deal with the issues that they have identified.
Okay. Recently, the government passed the board legislation which was passed in the parliament to increase the amount of borrowing
Yes.
that it would have so it can get its development program.
Correct.
Have you all begun to go out to source this money? Because there is a view that the economy is not really getting kick-started and the government itself is like it's afraid to spend money or I don't know. But so what are...
We're not afraid to spend money. We can't spend what we don't have. And I want to reiterate that every day now, which is something new for me, and probably a first for a Minister of Finance, I get a report from the central bank on the overdraft every single day. Before I came to this press conference, I noticed the report coming in from the central bank that we had 84% of the overdraft, which means we just have just over $1 billion available to run the country. And $1 billion runs the country for about 5 days. So it's not a question, we're not afraid. We can only do what we can do. Now, one of the meetings we had in Washington was with Deutsche Bank, who suggested that we do what is called a road show, which I'm contemplating, but it's quite a strenuous exercise. We go on the road and we go to various capitals of the world. This is the Ministry of Finance. It has been done before by the Ministry of Finance in the past. I think it was done in 2013 is the last time it was done. We do a road show and meet with all the major banks, investment banks, development banks in various capitals of the world to secure a line of credit of approximately $1 billion US. They think that it would be very easy for Trinidad and Tobago to do so. In fact, when we met with Deutsche Bank, they had already factored in, seems they had better information than we had. They had already factored in the potential of a downgrade in our rating. And even with that, they say it will be very easy for Trinidad and Tobago to raise at least $1 billion US on the international market. Now, the advantage of raising money overseas is that you get an immediate injection of foreign exchange, which builds your reserves, and then you repay that over a period of time, a long period of time. So let's say you get $1 billion US, you might have to pay back $100 million US a year over a 10-year period, so you don't have the hit on your reserves. Your reserves immediately get $1 billion US, and then that is depreciated over a period of time. So that's one of the benefits. You get very good interest rates as well, lower interest rates than we would get on the domestic market in Trinidad. So we're going to mix it up. And in fact, I got cabinet approval a short while ago to go to the local market to borrow 3 billion Trinidad dollars. So we have a combination of financing efforts planned for the balance of this fiscal year. And we will use that money. That is the money we have to use for our capital development program, because there's insufficient money coming in by way of taxation and one-off, extraordinary items of revenue and so on. So we have to borrow. And the deficit is simply the difference between revenues and expenditure, which is always financed by way of borrowing. Whenever you have a deficit budget, the deficit is always financed by way of borrowing. So we will be borrowing this year to get things going, and we are far advanced in terms of accessing these funds. Funds from the local market should start to come in within the next month, and then from the foreign market in the next 2 to 3 months. I don't know if that answers your question.
Minister of Finance, good afternoon. What is the state of our indebtedness, or the country's indebtedness to the IMF or the World Bank for that matter?
We don't owe them anything.
Indeed. Also, you may have heard that the former governor of the central bank, Mr. Jawala Rambaran, did ascribe certain comments or did make certain comments with respect to his removal, dismissal, or resignation from the bank. And some of them were far from complimentary. Do you have any response to that?
I'll simply repeat the response I made. No comment.
No comment. Minister of Legal Affairs, the Attorney General, Mr. Faris Alwari. Red flagging, of course, is not comforting to our citizens. You know, whenever that happens, you indicate that a foreign or national returning from abroad on suspicious activity, red flagging. Do we have numbers in the context of the number of people who would have been red flagged?
We certainly do.
And the other question I ask is, you made certain revelations about what was discovered or uncovered at the Royal Jail on Frederick Street. What is government's thinking on the status of the Royal Jail in terms of its future?
Well, the statements that I made in Parliament weren't solely to the Royal Jail in Port of Spain. On my wrap-up of the SSA bill last Friday in Parliament, gave an inkling of what has been found so far, involving cocaine, marijuana, bullets, ammunition, weapons, etc. Some very dramatic things. And I also gave information across a 30-day period and a 99-day period of literally millions of phone calls being blocked from the jails. Just two, in fact, just 2 jails alone. And also hundreds of thousands of cell phones sending text messages, etc. And in saying that, I indicated, because the opposition was asking then, well, what is the government doing? And one of the points that I was making in the debate was to say, well, we are applying the laws and better management using the same resources, because the people that have uncovered this information, the people that have managed this, these discoveries are the same prisons officers, etc., just with a little more assistance from the respective ministries, Ministry of National Security and the Office of the Attorney General, Ministry of Legal Affairs. And that therefore, when one drives the process with the mechanism in place that you ought to, that is not where you yourself are doing these things, but those who are authorized to do it are being encouraged and enabled to do it, that you're going to find very different circumstances. And it is in that fashion that we reported across a number of entities. The state of the prisons is entirely unsatisfactory. It was for this reason that I went to the public domain in the first of a series of Open the Door to the Office of the Attorney General events that we had, and we started with the prison system specifically so that we could disaggregate what was inside of the prisons. How many people were in pretrial detention? What were they there for? That leads you, of course, not only to a cost analysis, that it costs you $25,000 per head, per person in pretrial detention, roughly. But that when you incarcerate a lady, as a matter of fact, in one case, for 12 months because she could not pay $12,000 in a fine, and then you spend $25,000 a month times 12 months, you have to now look at the rationale behind incarceration in certain circumstances. This then leads us to the very next event which we will have, which is the criminal justice system, because coming out of that, the issue of application of maximum sentences already served has to be put forward. The issue of plea bargaining, the issue of the implementation of the law to deal with electronic monitoring, where you have the ability to be in observation whilst being on the outside of the prisons. All of these things flow, how we declog the system. So this was intended to show that the government has been very busy in ascertaining the facts, first of all, because far too often we speak about anecdotal information and nobody has the real facts. When I say to the country 2,270-something odd people are in pretrial detention and then tell you what for, how long, how much it costs, it's the first time this country has had that. Marry that against the legislative agenda which we've put out, and you will now see not only our identification of problems, but what the proposed solutions are. Because bear in mind, this opposition in this country right now is not doing as the PNM did when it was in opposition. We supported, and the statistics from the Senate will show it, approximately 90-something odd % of the legislation that came forward. After we did our work, we made recommendations, we made improvements to the law, and we supported the then government in anything to deal with crushing crime and criminality. This government, so far, has indicated that it is not prepared to support on special majority matters or, in fact, anything else. The leader of the opposition, in her debate on the SSA bill, after making contribution, provided not a single written proposal for amendment, and in fact went so far as to ask us to draft her amendments, saying she had no staff. This I bring to the fore right now simply to tell you it doesn't seem that we have the loyal opposition, quote unquote, as one uses the phrase, and that in fact the population would be invited to judge by action, and not only by intention and stated bacchanal. It's a very, very, very far removed form of responsibility from that which I think the country will insist upon and has come to expect.
Let me just correct, well, not correct, clarify. You, Ms. Tate asked me about the effect of the rating on our borrowing. I said 1.5%. That is 0.5%. So it is 0.5%, not 1.5. I realize that, you know, I might not have made myself clear. So it's 0.5%.
Attorney General, my colleague, Mr. Davies, did pose a question regarding what are the plans for the Port of Spain prison. Is there a plan to have it relocated? We've heard of these plans before, but does this administration have such a plan?
Well, associated with the prisons are a number of issues. First of all is the state and condition of existing prisons and whether it can meet the standards and conditions that one ought to prescribe for detention. And then secondly, the utilization of prisons has to be factored against your cost, because there is going to be a cost to managing this. Right now, the Ministry of Finance is juggling the economy, and the country is going to be invited to consider where it spends its money. So proposals will come ultimately from the Ministry of National Security, which has direct line supervision over the prison system, and those decisions to be made by a cabinet upon presentation of positions. But suffice it to say, there's a fair amount of juggling that we as a society will need to engage in right now to make sure that we're spending on the most urgent situations in the correct order of priority.
Okay, so is there a plan?
So as I said, maybe I've said it too politely for you. The fact is that the policy will come out of national security, which will present information by a note to cabinet at the appropriate time. I understand that the system is under review right now, and that position, I would expect the line minister, which is certainly not me, to then speak to that issue as to what the position with the Royal Jail, the Frederick Street Jail is. What I can tell you is that we are executing right now in that jail things which have not happened before, which is the surveillance and monitoring, CCTVs, etc., inside of that prison, so that one cannot then find out later on that you found marijuana and cocaine and guns, etc. We have a jail. We have to make sure that that jail meets with certain conditions, but also that a jail remains a jail where one is deprived of liberty until due process is served.
Minister Imbert, is there any indication how many cars might be affected by the proposed, by the moratorium?
No, but there's one particular dealer, that's just one, who told me they had 3 of them on the way. But to extrapolate from that, I can't say. It's difficult, but the numbers will be small. They're small, because these are expensive vehicles anyway.
The overall tax, as it would have applied, were there any estimates as to how many cars might have been captured?
Could you just repeat that question?
How many cars might have met the 1999cc criteria?
The vast majority of cars in Trinidad and Tobago, these are private passenger vehicles, 2 liters and below. When you see a vehicle that is, and it says 2 liters, that is really either a 1999 or 1995 vehicle. For example, many of the 2-liter SUVs that you see outside there, I'll give you some examples, the Hyundai Tucson and so on. Those are 1999. Motor vehicle manufacturers do that because tax authorities all over the world use the engine size to do categories of taxation. So it's just like you go in a store and you see something is $9.99. Well, motor vehicle manufacturers, they come in at 1999. So I would say the vast majority of private motor cars, I can't tell if it's 90% or 87%, but it's the vast majority, are 1999 and below. And the vast majority of luxury motor cars are above 1999. And as I said in the Parliament on Tuesday, not this, the week before, actually it was last week, come to think of it, that we're looking at the new approach of these luxury car manufacturers where they turbocharge the engines. So we're looking at horsepower as well. It's a little more complex. It's easy to do a cutoff at 1999 because, you know, once you go above 2 liters, that is most people's concept of what a luxury vehicle is a vehicle that is more than 2 liters. But in terms of horsepower, it's not so easy. So that will be dealt with in the September-October budget coming up, an examination of horsepower as it relates to luxury vehicles. So I don't know if that answers your questions. No, the point I made when I spoke is that I will make that clear in the House of Representatives when I pilot the 2 orders for debate, the increase in customs duty and the increase in motor vehicle tax. It's a balancing act because what we want to avoid is cheating. We want to avoid people, you know, submitting falsified documents to say that they had a vehicle on the way or it was, you know, they already purchased or ordered as the case may be. So I can't make it too long, but I have to make it as reasonably long. I would say somewhere between 2 and 3 weeks. I'm just giving you an approximate time frame now from today, because I think it should really, the time should count from today in terms of the notice to people. It will be, of course, retroactive to the 8th of April in terms of its effect. But in terms of telling people what's going on, the time will run from today. And I'm looking at 2 weeks, 3 weeks, that sort of thing. I'm discussing it with the used car dealers and I'm discussing it with the new car dealers to see how many shipments they have on the way, how many customers they have who would have, you know, made down payments, purchased vehicles, how many cars there are in bond, how many on the port. And based on that, I'll come up with a definite time frame. I don't know if that helps you.
Just in relation to this issue, is it that there was the risk that people might, or dealers might be left with cars on their hands that, you know, people might change their minds and not decide to buy these cars and they would have these cars now?
It's a double risk. It's not just that dealers would have purchased the vehicles from their suppliers overseas and the cars will be on their way or they're on the port and they haven't been cleared yet, the taxes have not yet been paid. That's a risk to the dealer. And then the dealer is stuck with this vehicle and can't sell it. But I mean, that is a business issue. I was more concerned, not to say I'm not minded to assist, you know, local businesses, but I was more concerned with the effect on individuals because it takes a while after your car has landed in Trinidad and Tobago. It takes a while for it to be cleared from the port and then cleared from the bond and then registered by the licensing office and so on. It sometimes could take 2 to 3 weeks for this process. So there would have been people who would have already ordered and paid a down payment, as the case may be, for a vehicle that was on the docks, but had not yet been cleared and the taxes being paid. So I was more concerned about the effect on individuals. I am, of course, also concerned on the effect on businesses, but my focus is on helping people who got caught, because no one would have known what I was going to say on that Friday. Nobody had a clue. So that persons would have gone ahead and made their purchases and so on. So I'm more towards helping individuals, but I will be helping the companies as well to give them a reasonable time to deal with this new event, this change.
Just one more question. we see all these revelations, and I'm talking to I guess the Attorney General, but the Minister of Finance too could answer. All these revelations, TV6 had a expose with Calco, and we continue to see revelations of people who have been paid like for 90% of the contract price for 40% of the work, or, you know, it's a recurring theme. What is being done either in terms of the finances or in terms of misbehavior in public life or whatever to deal with this consistent thread that we have coming out with all these revelations of contracts given to companies, monies, first of all, they are getting more than the mobilization fee or whatever it is up front, and then they get a lot of the contract, and you go and the structures are nowhere near completed. What exactly, I mean, is it that's just wastage of funds? And, you know, you hear the Minister of Finance saying we don't have money, or, you know, so what exactly are we doing to try to get back some kind of...
There are two approaches. I want the money, and therefore we're contractually, lawfully, legally, realistically, it can be recovered. You know, if payments are being made that people were not entitled to for work that was not done, then from a finance point of view, we would want to recover. That's all taxpayers' money, and it's needed to run the country. So from a finance perspective, I would want to recover as much money as I can. From the legal perspective, I will hand it over to the Attorney General.
It's for this reason that we focused very squarely upon some very simple concepts: the elimination of corruption, waste, and mismanagement. Obviously, as Attorney General, I want to state categorically, nothing will be done without due process and from the agencies with responsibility to manage these purposes. It isn't the role of an Attorney General to be persecutorial. It is the role of an Attorney General to advise the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago and to have responsibility for civil and criminal purview within the purview of the Constitution. That said, these matters are receiving active consideration on a range of remedies that are to be applied. There will, of course, be some that reside in the criminal jurisdiction, and there would be some that reside in the civil jurisdiction. Those entities that have direct interest in these matters will be driving their portfolios. The concept of maintenance and champati, that's where you go off and you pay for someone's litigation and you micromanage the litigation, is not something to be prospered. What is responsible is that if, for instance, NIDCO has a particular contractual issue, that NIDCO drives its positions after having received appropriate advice. The days when you would see the Attorney General previously, in a previous government, stand up and make persecutorial statements and say what he or she is doing is, in our view, inappropriate. It is unseemly. It leads to positions where right now all that we are seeing is collapsed litigation after collapsed litigation. What the people of Trinidad and Tobago want is to have effective positioning. I want to just draw a few dots, connect them for you. The government changed in September. Much of the boards changed by December. We are January, February, March, now April. That's 4 months. Any claim that one has to be driven on the back of evidence. It isn't he say, she say gallery that takes you to conviction. There's a process to get there, and we have been very busy as a government and the Office of the Attorney General in particular in doing things the correct way. We know that the people of Trinidad and Tobago expect us to deliver with due process in tow, and that's exactly what we commit ourselves to. We are looking for the financial remedies that are available. It may be in the civil domain. Wherever there is criminality involved, that will be passed to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service for investigation and for them to do their work.
Attorney General, the government has announced a number of reviews of contracts under the past administration for various state projects. I'm just wondering how close is the state to completing these reviews in the context of the need that some would argue for stimulation of the economy by some of these very set projects?
I can report that there are, of course, a number of them afoot, as you know. Some of them have just ripened to completion. Others are in the process of mid-positioning, and some are near the end. So there are quite a few to come up. Obviously, where the focus ought to be is where we wish to place it, and that is on value for money and accountability. So there must be transparency in the process, and you must act within the 4 quarters of the law. You must be transparent in your application of the law, and you must allow the processes of the law to go to work. That's why we have a court system. You take your matters to the court or to the police, and you just encourage it to get done. I'll just draw the analogy to the manner in which you operationalize laws, and I'll park it closely to the anti-terrorism effort, where you have the laws available to you. The point is to use it and to have it done effectively.
Just another matter. When the Works Minister said in Parliament last week, the incident in which two persons have been charged for throwing a grenade at their vehicle in Barataria that led 2 people injured, he called it terrorism. Was that based on any specific briefing that the cabinet had received on that incident?
I understood the minister to be speaking within the confines of the SSA bill. I did not understand the minister to have made a statement on behalf of the cabinet. Suffice it to say, he had just simply reported, as I heard and understood, upon the fact that there had been an arrest in relation to the throwing of a grenade, which certainly is an act which falls under the anti-terrorism law. That is a fact. One can look at it in multiple ways. It falls under offenses for firearms. It falls under the anti-terrorism factor. It could cause public panic, etc. And we all do know that the Minister of Works and Transport is himself also an attorney at law.
Let me just rephrase the question then. Has the cabinet received a specific briefing on that incident that would lead it to believe it was in fact an act of terrorism?
The cabinet doesn't receive matters like that. The National Security Council is the entity that receives reports like that, and those deliberations in both places are entirely confidential, as I'm sure you know.
Minister Cuffie, I want to ask you a question about the declaration by the Minister of Health in response to the calls for some kind of look-in on the issue of abortions in Trinidad and Tobago. Was that a cabinet position?
It's the government's position.
But I mean, his statement in the wake of the calls by those proponents.
Sorry, would you just clarify and tell me exactly what his statement is?
That the government
will
not attend to this issue by persons who are calling for a review of the laws on abortion in Trinidad and Tobago, coming out of people's concerns about people affected with the Zika virus. He said that the government will not change the law.
No, just to be clear, he stated that the current position on abortion is the law of the land, and the government will obey the law of the land. I don't think he spoke about intentions, and what he said that we'll observe the laws of the land, and that's the government's position.
Right, and is that not a way of saying that the government has no intention of addressing it?
What I can say, and I want to reserve this entirely to the Minister of Health, who has purview for this, but suffice it to say I'm aware that the Minister of Health will be issuing certain protocols together with a large consortium of relevant practitioners, etc., in this field to treat specifically with the incidence of Zika and pregnancies, and that is a matter to be spoken about with the Minister of Health. I believe that the consultations or promulgations come very soon. That is certainly something that I would advise you to put to the Minister of Health. I didn't recall, as did the Minister of Public Administration and Communications, that the Minister said what you attributed to him.
Well, I was reading from what I read in a story in the Express a couple of days ago, in which he went on to say, well, if we do it for people who are pregnant with the Zika, with the possibility that the children will come out with this microcephaly, would we not do it in other cases where people have problems with pregnancy?
Let me respond to that, Andy. It's simply government, cabinet have taken no decision on this. The minister is addressing the issue tomorrow at his press conference, and you are free to raise it there.
Well, that's what I was trying to find out. Whether
Yeah.
his latest statement and his definitive pronouncement on it was the result of a position taken in the cabinet, or that this is his simply upholding what he understands to be the law, but he says that there will be no change to the law.
I didn't hear him say that. What he said was that the law of the land is the government official position, and that has not changed.
And the cabinet has not had any discussion on it in the week or so since the matter has surfaced in the way that it has.
Mr. Johnson, you do know, and this is about the 4th time you've raised this, you've asked for cabinet discussions. I know that you know very well that cabinet discussions are secret and confidential. You know that. However, we appreciate the point that you're trying to raise now, which is your reading of a situation. You've said that you, quote unquote, are reading something in. Simple position is that the Minister of Health has informed us that he will be making a public position in relation to this issue, together with the experts in the areas, and I would invite you to certainly participate in that venture when he announces it, I believe in the course of tomorrow. Thank you so much.
And let me clear up something here, Mr. Johnson, lest you go away with the wrong impression. What the Minister of Health will be dealing with tomorrow is protocols to deal with women who are pregnant in the midst of this Zika issue. That's what he's dealing with. Protocols for pregnant women who may be exposed to the possibility of contracting Zika or who have already contracted Zika, if there are any. That's what he's dealing with, medical protocols, not statements with respect to the law. I think the minister has said everything that he would say on this matter at this time. And I would just clarify for you that no decision has been taken on this matter, if that helps you at all. No decision has been taken on this matter, if that assists you. Okay?
Just 3 questions in one here. First of all, the matter of that $1 million compensation to bona fide family or members of
I think we dealt with that last week.
Yes, but I'm asking, by the same token, is government considering as well any up on the victim compensation funding? Also, the Minister of Finance did underscore the fact that at his appropriation, variation of appropriation presentation, that the Board of Inland Revenue needs to ramp up its collection efforts. Has the message gotten through? And finally, is there anything being done to increase the number of CNG stations in Trinidad and Tobago? And as well, is the PTSC in gear?
That's 4 questions.
Yes, well, they are in one, but the questions are there. The Minister of Finance these issues.
That is it?
Yes.
I'm not sure that is it, you know.
Yes. Yes.
Because, you know, in Parliament, we parliamentarians only are allowed to ask one supplementary question. You just came with 4.
You're intelligent enough to be able to scope up those questions, are you?
Yeah, but we also need to wrap up. I will answer the ones that addressed to me, which would be BIR, of course. Like all institutions in this country, there's need for a dramatic reform and improvement in service delivery. And certainly, the current difficult financial circumstance has brought this to the fore, and especially with the Board of Inland Revenue. I speak to them often, and I will continue to give them the support that they require to collect as much revenue as possible and to streamline and upgrade and modernize their procedures. That's with respect to finance. So it's an ongoing program with me as Minister and the Ministry of Finance. We'll continue to see how we could improve the operations of BIR.
CNG.
That's not Minister of Finance. Yeah, but CNG stations is not the Minister of Finance. I suggest you address that matter to the Minister of Energy, who unfortunately is not present today. But pose the question directly to her.
Thank you all very much. This has been very engaging, and see you next week.
All right.
Thank you.